Welcome to the ADHD Open Space Podcast. My name is Gray Miller, and I will be your host and facilitator as we explore ideas, workarounds, accommodations, and other aspects of being a professional adult with ADHD. Most of this will come from my perspective as a cis white male in his mid-50s, living in the Midwest, who found out a year ago that I've been living with ADHD my entire life. I am not an expert on ADHD, except maybe in not knowing I've had it for half a century and somehow still getting by. But I promise to cite my sources, or at least admit when I'm repeating something I read on the interwebs. If I say anything you don't agree with, you're welcome to call me on it and let me know. Enjoy the show. I was interviewed recently by the hosts of a decluttering podcast. There's a link that'll come to that later on. It's not online yet. I've been writing about organization systems and techniques of keeping track of stuff for decades. I've always enjoyed trying out new systems, finding out the advantages and limitations, and constantly re-optimizing them in various ways, whether physical, like whiteboards and labeled boxes, or paper, 53 folders, file cabinets, and notebooks, or digital, Obsidian, Notion, Johnny Decimal, tags, so many tags. It has gotten to the point where I finally have to accept that it's not so much a need to get organized as a hobby that I enjoy. Being a productivity organization nerd for so long has made me into a bit of a resource for friends and clients as well. In any given situation, I usually can find a few different ways to organize, systematize, and optimize it, with good ideas of the pros and cons of each system. So a long chat with a couple of decluttering enthusiasts was a wonderful way to spend a Saturday afternoon, and we laughed and traded ideas and experiences for over an hour. Finally, one of the hosts asked me a question that resonated more deeply than I expected. She said, "Has your diagnosis of ADHD changed any of the ways that you approach decluttering or organizing?" That sounds like an easy question, right? I could just point to the ADHD-friendly PDF planner I just bought, or my ADHD Everyday Carry Kit, or something like that. But for some reason, that conversation set my brain into deeper, more existential motivations, and two seemingly contradictory words bubbled up to the surface of my brain. I told her, yes, I give myself more grace and more discipline. This particular episode is going to talk about the first of those, grace. Now, grace is hard for a recovering workaholic, ex-hustle culture, single-parent, former Marine like me. I mean, love languages are one thing, but what about motivational languages? We all have varying ways of talking ourselves into doing things, as well as giving feedback to ourselves about the things that we've done. Quite often, these voices are echoes of the voices that we internalized from others in our lives: parents, peers, teachers, partners, bosses, mentors, maybe even books or podcasts. To use a distasteful example, a pickup artist enthusiast will likely start referring to people in terms of how attractive they find them, usually with a number, because objectifying people with labels is much easier than actually interacting with them. But the interesting thing is that they will also refer to themselves with that numbering system, and it becomes a motivation for self-improvement. Well, I'm only a 6, but if I get in shape and dress better, I can move up to a 7 or 8, and then I'll have a chance with a 9, maybe even a not picky 10. It's gross and effective, unfortunately, in some people I've met, in getting them to pay more attention to their health and appearance. Even more distasteful and also, unfortunately, effective is the use of self-directed shame and anger as a motivator. Now, I know this because many of my own accomplishments and, quote, good habits came from this kind of motivation. Nobody beats me up better than the drill instructor in my head. What do you mean you don't feel like working out? Since when does a man your age have a choice in that? I don't know what I did to deserve to be stuck in the head of someone this pathetic. Or they resort to shame. Well, no wonder your blog numbers fell. You don't get up at 5 a.m. and write anymore the way that real writers do. Might as well just keep scrolling Instagram. Your work isn't ever going to amount to anything anyway. or just things not being good enough, the perfectionist side, even when they do get done. Sure, you think you're a clever writer coming up with these little voices in your head, but 3, 4 examples, if you count the pickup artist, that's ridiculous. Nobody's going to read or listen that much. You should have spent more time editing instead of just squeezing in your writing on your lunch break. No wonder you're not a top writer. That's been my motivation for most of my life, bullying and berating and belittling myself into getting things done. And it's been quite effective because I've done a lot of things. And I've certainly achieved the mainstream milestones of masculine success. And amidst being treated for depression and anxiety that was the result of all that success, came the news from my therapist and my psychiatrist. Oh, you have ADHD combined type. And it's pretty obvious you've had it your entire life. So that diagnosis added a new voice in my head. A whole new set of ideas, like a clarification of the contributing factors to a huge number of decisions, events, and behaviors in my life. The simple understanding that my brain does not process dopamine the way that approximately 97% of other brains do explained why so much of the world I lived in, the world that was designed to work for that other 97%, didn't make sense to me and was a struggle to function in. That lent a voice of grace to my inner dialogue. When I couldn't remember something, a name, a location, an event, that I knew I was actually familiar with, it wasn't a matter of trying harder. I stopped saying, "I'm sorry, I don't remember," and instead I say, "I'm sorry, my brain's not giving me access to that information right now." And sometimes I follow it up with, "But don't worry, it will later on." Way too late to be useful, but at least I know it's there. I understand now that there are some things my brain simply does not do well. And some of them I can make a bit better with things like sleep or meds, but that's not going to fix anything. It just mitigates the effects. My obsession with organization, decluttering, habit change, self-improvement over all these years was my brain trying desperately to find a solution to a problem that it could feel but never really understand. It was like getting new tires on the car when there was really a problem with the fuel line. I'd managed to haphazardly create enough scaffolding in my life to not only function, but occasionally thrive as an adult. But it was exhausting. And in the end, I found myself in that aforementioned constant state of anxiety and depression. Some of that is still there. When I don't get enough sleep, forget my meds, or simply have the chaos of a day negate the scaffolding, I simply have to accept that I am not going to be as functional in the world that day as I would like to be. No amount of coffee, power naps, or affirmations is going to fix that any more than they would fix the pain in my decartilaged knees when I'm facing a flight of stairs during a Wisconsin winter. But that understanding does change the motivation a bit. None of those other voices are the types to pick on someone with a disability, so there's less, "You're all worthless and weak," and more, "Give it the best you can." It also means that many, not all, but many, of the "What were you thinking, Gray?" moments in my past make so much sense. Why did that data entry job feel like it was torture when everyone else just seemed to find it annoying? Because my brain needs variety, and insurance forms don't give that. Why did I time after time suddenly feel like all the spark had gone out of a relationship and spend so much time chasing new relationship energy? Why did I love being a freelancer working on different projects, or a presenter or event producer traveling around the world to the point where I burned myself out in spite of the feast or famine income that I was barely scraping by on? All of it came down to, because, Gray, that's how your brain works. And you didn't know that. You're not a failure. You can't solve a problem you don't even know exists. It was grace. It was healing, even. But along with it comes the corollary. Now, though, you know what's going on. And that means that some things around here have got to change. And that's what we'll get into in the next episode. If you have any comments or thoughts about this podcast, you can feel free to find me on Instagram, ADHD Open Space, and you can also find me via email, gray@adhdopen.space. You can also find me on Medium. I'm all over the place, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd like to hear how you have managed to find some grace for yourself, or how you would like to. We'll talk to you again next week, at least for a while. Thanks. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the ADHD Open Space podcast. Again, my name is Gray Miller. If you have any comments or questions about the show, you can feel free to leave them on the podcast page at adhdos.substack.com/podcast, or you can email me directly, Gray, Gray, @adhdopen.space. The background music for the intro and outro are from pixabay.com and are called Funny Days Together by Background Music Lab, used under a YouTube Content ID license.